You have been an artist in residence at the Castle of Institute, you were saying. I guess if you could start off by talking about what you hoped to do when you were arriving, and any ideas or hopes that you had coming in, and your experience, and how that might have changed over 6 weeks, and where you are now with this work, but also your work in general.
Sure. Well, this is my first artist residency, and I had placed kind of completely unrealistic expectations on myself. I was like, I'm gonna have this really amazing gallery ready show, because I just and have necessarily a frame for understanding what the intention of the residency was, and I think it's been really wonderful to have the full 6 weeks to be able to sort of let go of this desire to have finished, completed, totally polished work and come to a place of just really having playfulness with the process, and just being able to let myself to go to places spiritually and emotionally and in the material formally that I think maybe I would have arrived at those places, but it just didn't take as long, because I was able to really have that time and space to just be with myself and be with the work. And I feel about this work, I've gone through a lot of different feelings over the last 24 hours of installing this, but I think I'm at a place with it now where I feel really excited to see where some of the impulses that I've been following the last 6 weeks will take me in my work in the next, the next personal Afrofuture that I'm in, and I'm excited to have been able to, because I'm a self-taught artist, it's really difficult actually to find the kind of space that I've been able to have, to not have to focus on the millions of things that have to happen in order to make anyone's life move forward day to day, and to just really be able to focus on my work has just been such a gift. And I definitely have the residency bug and just want to go everywhere.
That's good.
And make everything, yeah.
So could you talk us through what's in this room right now? Maybe we could do a circle.
Start here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so this piece is called Floats, and I've done sort of smaller scale installation with soft sculpture and family archival photos and materials. And I think something that really happened in this residency is that I was able to place myself within, because something that I work with a lot is this concept of kind of being part of a cell in a body, or having one fragment of an archive. And I think that I was able to place myself within that archive a little bit more as myself, and not as someone who's bearing witness to that archive, if that makes sense, but actually how does this move through me and my body, as opposed to how does it move through a larger social body, and what are the places where those connect. And that led me to think a lot about legacies of trauma that, specifically as a Black woman, as a queer woman, as someone who is descended from women who had dreams of artistic vision and artistic purpose, but were, for a variety of reasons, never able to fully realize those dreams. This process has been a huge process of engaging in trust in myself in a way that it is, I think, new for me, or there's a certain level of risk that had to be taken. And so this piece is sort of working with some of those questions. To be able to feel like I can execute something that moves in the way that this does, and the way that, for me, thinking about flotation as, I don't know, there's this like ambiguity in it where my ability to float, to like move through space, my ability to kind of hold my body in a way that has a little bit more lightness and doesn't feel so dense, is actually so and my ability and inability to do that at different times has so much to do with these legacies of trauma, some of which are things that happened in my lifetime and some of which extend farther back than any rational quote-unquote memory that I carry in myself. And so the baskets that are hanging off of the body are meant to be symbolic of the ways that we hold memory, the way that the body itself can be a repository of these different experiences of trauma, and how that can prevent us from elevation, but also can be this source of material that can be alchemized and turned into something that allows us to move through with more ease. Yeah, so that's that one. Okay. And then this piece is called Freedom Underneath the Sun. The Earth is the Softest Fur. And this is me just sort of beginning to explore with working with mixed media in a different kind of way. I feel like something that's more similar to work that I would have done before this residency is like the way that these black and white and purple pieces, there's some departures that are happening, but this is like a little bit more similar in the sense of like, I like to use things that hang and thread. Like I like to use like Kanekalon hair for braiding in other installations. And so this is my attempt to move beyond a little bit, or challenge myself to move beyond a little bit that fluidity, which feels like a really, I need that, like I need that sense of flow and movement in that way, but wanting to try it with materials that, I don't know, fur, obviously there is a movement to it, but the way that it's situated in that piece, it's static, and it's meant to communicate the ways that, I don't know, that fertility, or like that sense of softness that comes from the earth is this place that feels, or like one sensory access point, I guess, for it is immobile, is this understanding of the earth as this place that is just something that we all walk around on, and not an activated in live space, but also another way of accessing that is this sense of earth as a mobile, soft, welcoming place if we allow it for ourselves and for other people. And I started working, it kind of had to get turned out because that piece on the wall, and you can see it in this piece as well too, of the two sort of like intertwined figures, but I started to work with limbs a lot here, because I was thinking a lot about the limbs, particularly the arms and hands, as these sort of like, there are parts of the body that feel sort of ambiguous to me, like they can inflict pleasure, or they can inflict pain, they can caress, they can hit, they can defend against violence. Like there's like so many ways that a limb can be, for me, can symbolize the ways that all of the intimacies that we carry are actually somewhat ambiguous, and loaded with this complexity that I think we don't often afford them, and wanting to sort of make a little bit of room to talk about that. And so I started working with that, or the way that I worked with that in this piece was trying to, because I was starting to get really like, oh my God, like, I'm so overwhelmed with my trust issues and intimacy issues. I need to imagine a space for myself that actually is in this state of calm, but I still wanted there to be a sense of movement.
Some of the things that I am hearing from you in talking about your pieces have to do a lot with space and the way that we occupy those spaces. So I think about floating above a space, right? Being part of a space, but only insofar as you're sort of hovering or you're like a layer above it. Do you think of that as being related in general to the way that Afrofuturism deals with space? Do you feel like your work is connected to a kind of Afrofuturism? Are you sort of outside of that? What's your...
I think so. I think in the sense that, this is actually a conversation that Aaliyah and I had while we were here, but talking about the ways that, like all of the energy of all the different kinds that it's in this room, for example, right now, is like we're all sort of like skimming space with one another in these ways that are really intimate. It's like even on this level that feels really like molecular, and wanting to, I guess in the sense of Afrofuturism, wanting to explore those spaces that seem almost so small that they become really infinite. They can be moved into sort of like, if there's like 0.0 and 0.1, you can move so many infinite times in between 0 and 1. Does that sort of make sense in terms of thinking about that sense of Afrofuturism in space? And you know, it makes sense to me. And like the ways that we can kind of like with these very small like energetic interactions like inflict harm upon another person, and there's something or to create a sense of warmth and love and invitation for someone, and wanting to talk about the ways that these intimacies accumulate in a body. And so for me, I guess in thinking about that in relationship to Afrofuturism, it makes me think, especially with like this year's theme, which is home and ecology, thinking about the ecology of a space as the people who populate it, as well as the ways that the choices that people make in their bodies prior to entering any space.
Yeah.
And thinking of the body as itself as like a microcosm of larger like extant spaces outside of the body.
Yeah. I want to open this up too, so if anybody has a question or a comment, feel free to just raise your hand. This should feel sort of informal. Is there a piece in here that, I'm sort of going back to what you were saying about trusting yourself, and also giving failure space, giving yourself space to fail. Is there a piece in this room that you feel like challenged you the most, and why?
Yeah, let's see. I mean, kind of two for different reasons, you know.
Please, yeah.
This was, I mean, just like logistically, we were, I mean, what 5:30 we finished hanging this?
Yes.
A little before. It was definitely like, I had to learn like several new skill sets in order to be able to execute this.
Like what?
Let's see, jigsawing. Just in general, thinking about installation in a more robust way, and like kind of researching that and going into that more deeply. I learned a lot about load-bearing weight and finding the right hardware for that. I learned a lot about scale and how to, I guess, thinking about scaling something like this appropriately so that it had the desired effect, which is to be, you know, a little looming and imposing and like because with this piece, part of what's happening is like, you know, like trust in myself and the materials in the process, but also like trusting all of you that are like sitting underneath this, that I like figured it out, which I did, like it's fine, but like going through this process of having to really engage with, because I think for me too, that was also about having to engage with like a lot. I'm like really, this is a lot for me. I'm like a socially anxious kind of person, like, you know, to be so, and this is like, that's my body. You know,
this is your outline.
That's
so
me.
yeah, this is somebody outlined you and you kind of.
Yeah, so to sort of, I think in some ways this piece is holding a lot of my anxiety. It feels like maybe in the tradition of people working with dolls to like hold parts of the spirit. I feel like it's like able to kind of be a placeholder for some of that fear. So I think that engaged sort of a variety of levels. And I think, honestly, in terms of just my own emotional process, one of the hardest pieces to work on was in this series,
This one.
the Mother Wound series,
Uh-huh.
the one that's sort of like the
white yarn connected across
Yeah.
them. Uh-huh.
the one that's the black Madonna that's sort of like floating in this like floating in this sea or floating in this like kind of like dislocated environment.
Yeah.
Like that was really challenging because I in thinking about that questions of what's stored in different parts of the body, thinking about the ambiguity of the limb and how in all of the iterations of like Black Madonnas that I'd seen in my research while I was here, the carrier, the arm that's the carrier of the child feels like this really important part of like what those series talked about. And so I thought in thinking about, as I was conceptualizing what it meant to have mother wounds and thinking about the ways that I feel like because of legacies of things like that still, like the legacies that still continue into this day of things like the transatlantic slave trade and the ways that families were severed from one another, I thought about what would it mean to remove that limb, and then what becomes the thing that holds the child is like the breast milk itself. And it's like the nourishment that comes from the body that is almost this like, because I'm also interested in the ways that bodies are compelled by space.
Yeah.
And bodies are compelled by interaction with other bodies, and how this process of lactation is something that happens automatically in birth, and that's something that also is so loaded in the history of the ways that Black women's bodies are and were abused by these processes, and how just sort of having to really sit with and hold the fact that part of the reason why I have a hard relationship with my mother, and she had a hard relationship with her mother, goes back to these things that have nothing, like we had no, it's like, I had, like there was no control,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So wanting to articulate that space of wanting to nurture and being compelled to nurture, but it feeling also like this really scary, violent thing to engage with.
Yeah. And you talked about going back into your family archives and also about your research process. And I think it's so fascinating about your practice that you are combining these two kinds of research, we could say, you know, the sort of more, the kind of research we might imagine when we think the word research, but then also an internal research, right? And going back into the family or into a relationship or into relationships past and seeing what else is there. I think a lot of people in this room are makers of some kind who, correct me if I'm wrong, engage with research at some point in your process. Can you talk about what your research process is?
Sure. I mean, I think for me, there's no distinction between my art practice and my spiritual practice, and me going to therapy and me engaging with my body in the ways that I do, and like the rituals and practices that I have around that. Like for me, if I'm thinking about ways that I want to represent Black motherhood or Black femininity or Black women in a space of nurturance, I necessarily have to engage with my relationship to those things. And I think that for me that comes from like a long history of Black feminist pedagogy that speaks to the ways that we can't disentangle our personal histories from political processes. And so engaging with this place of lack in mother-child relationships in the context of the Black social body and in the context of like Black familial living, at least this part of the diaspora in the US that I'm the most familiar with. It's like there's no way that if I want to make work about those things, I can't think about my own kind of like biographical.
Right.
Doesn't mean that everything that's ever happened to me is going to go in every piece, but I'm also making the work for myself. Like I'm making the work to heal these things in myself, or at least try to strive towards something that looks like transformation and healing of these things. So
and you also have a healing practice outside of
yes
art?
Yeah.
Could you, how does that interact with your, I mean, so there's the healing in your practice. Do you find that there are other ways that your healing practice interacts with your art practice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I work a lot with plants in a variety of ways for like for my physical body and my emotional well-being, and I feel like there's something that happens in this realm that's totally like mysterious and nonlinear that I'm like just willing to bow to and accept that I don't understand, which is a very non-Western approach to moving through the world, and I'm okay with that. There's something that, for me at least, that unlocks, that is able to look into, like I can like work with a tincture or a tea or a plant, and something will happen where I'll be able to access memories that I don't, there's no like A to B logical reason why I should be able to know the things that I know sometimes. And I think this is something I talked about a little bit on this residency, just informally with different people, but I think in order to have a humanizing understanding of me and of my work and the space that I hope that it holds in the world, I think it necessarily requires like a suspension of a certain kind of investment in like a what I see as like a white Western sort of like patriarchal understanding of rationality that seeks to, for me, what it feels like it seeks to do is to enclose and contain and really limit what's able to be held as reality and held in what feels like it's informing how we all experience our own bodies. And so I feel like part of what I'm trying to do with my healing practice and in like the ways that the research extends in all these different directions is to constantly, whether I'm trying to or not, like as like a willful act of like resistance or something, but what winds up happening is like constantly having to ignore that frame or to kind of like just like set it aside and be like, I know that to some people or to some this doesn't make sense, but that's fine because it's not for them, you know. Yeah.
Anybody have stuff you want to add? I think keep going. Requests for questions that I could ask? Okay. I'm thinking about frames and maybe also looping back to Afrofuturism, like a question that I've had over the past 2 years has been about whether or how Afrofuturism can function as a frame and when it's useful and when it's not useful to talk about things in that way. Are there times that you feel like Afrofuturism as a frame is not serving you or other artists?
I think that the way that it wouldn't serve me is only the way that, like, I feel like any label or definition is there's always something limiting or being, and necessarily in an act of defining something in a positive sense, there's always like this negative space that is like escapes that a little bit and is sort of like hovering around it, you know, like a nucleus in a cell or something. So I feel like I understand my work within the frame of Afrofuturism primarily in my relationship to time and how time for me is something that feels nonlinear and simultaneous. But do I think that it's limiting? I wouldn't say so, more so than any other thing that one might label my work within, you know?
Yeah. I don't know if you know about Black quantum futurism.
I love Black quantum
yeah, of course.
futurism.
So
yeah.
There's tried to give a sort of rundown, but there's an Afrofuturist center in Philly, which as far as I know is the only other Afrofuturist center, and they're amazing. But they talk about something called Black quantum futurism, which is sort of an alternative to Afrofuturism. And I think the quantum, what they're wanting to accomplish with the quantum is to bring us into thinking about time and space, right? And the ways that we can sort of think of ourselves as scientists, you know, when we're artists, so we do research, but we also do these experiments. And we also know things that we couldn't rationally know through art, and we move through space in ways that we couldn't rationally move through space, right? Can you talk more about nonlinear time and what that means to you on a daily basis?
I can try. I mean, I guess those I feel like that question is like two parts of a magnet that are like kind of like this.
Feel free to ignore any.
No. I mean, okay, so nonlinear time on a daily basis. I mean, I guess I submit because I have to the clock, but it's not willing, and I feel like it's just like another way that I'm just like, capitalism is like compelling me to do something again that I don't want to do. But I think there's something that happens in sacred space, which to me is any space where there's a sense of a container, any sense of like an awareness that what's being shared in that space isn't necessarily going to be shared by everyone outside of it. And I think that there's something that happens in those kinds of spaces where time, and in smaller moments too throughout the day, where I feel like I'm able to like create that sacred space for myself, and sometimes I do that with other people that I care about, and sometimes it's like just me doing it by myself, or me doing it with like my ancestors, or like in front of an altar, or with the earth itself. But trying to find ways to, I think it's about like pacing and really slowing down. Like I think if I have a sensory understanding of how nonlinear time moves across a field of space, I feel like it happens in these like really subtle, slow whispers that I think if we're in a state of distraction or in a state of dissociation, I think it's a little bit harder to access.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, the way that I am able to it's almost like jumping into, or like being able to kind of like reach into a stream. I think the way that I'm able to dip into the realm that nonlinear time exists in is through like kind of like daily spiritual practice that allows me to suspend the part of my mind that thinks it knows everything and thinks that I know everything about myself, or I know everything about my mother, I know everything about my family, or I know what this means, I know what this looks like, I know what it means when I encounter this person, I know, all of these assumptions that we make like all the time. I'm just like making them constantly, and part of it is like the way that capitalism compels us to be efficient in a certain kind of way, even again to the detriment of our own sacredness. And it's like everybody's like, oh, like I feel like sacredness or like this the kind of stuff is like trending right now or something, but I think that there's a way that if we can disengage and just allow for like uncertainty and stillness, I think that a lot actually arrives to meet us that we don't have to pursue.
Yeah. And it something I've been thinking about a lot is freedom as a, rather than sort of like a highfalutin concept that I only interact with theoretically, something that I really return to every day. And something that I've been noticing just in my own practice is the importance of mystery, and also the importance of, I read an essay by Louis Kamnitzer where he talks about art thinking, which is another way that we might talk about sort of knowing things before you know them. I have this experience reading my own poems where I'll read a poem that I wrote a year ago and it's like, oh, I knew in that moment a year ago what I'm only admitting to myself now.
Right.
Yeah. Are there artists whose work you feel like you go to for that sense of mystery?
Oh, wow, yeah, it's a long list. The first names that come to mind are Allison and Betty Saar, just in the way that I feel like Betty Saar especially is able to, like the way that she approaches materials, like she's just like, let's just, I wanna create literally create a box of mystery. I wanna hold and contain, even if it's for a moment, this sense of mystery through the way that she's like working with materials. And I think that there's a way that she's able to find the life and animate it in objects and arrange them in such a way that I've never seen anybody else really be able to do. Alison Saar's sculpture in particular and her work, the way that she engages the body in her work has been something that has really always captivated me. Like, just, I don't know, I love the way that she engages the body as this place that's so like, it's like she loves to stuff her sculptures full of like cotton and tobacco and all of these things. Like she was like, it's like for her, it seems like the body in the archive is this place that feels very like full and like it overflows from the body. I mean Ana Mendieta as well, in terms of just Ana Mendieta, Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, Belkis Ayon, a lot of
Belkis Ayon, I saw
Cuban
Belkis Ayon shows.
yeah, a lot of Cuban artists for some reason, Afro-Cuban and also for some reason there's like a resonance in that part of the diaspora. Again, it's like one of those things where I'm like, that's interesting. I wonder why, but I'll never know.
Yeah.
Are there interactions that you hope that people will have with your work?
Yeah, I definitely hope this series is or this like body of work, I guess. I'm really hoping that the main thing that I hope that it does is to like provide that space for being able to shift between worlds the way that we're talking about, like being able to shift between lenses. Because I think for me that question of like suspending or being okay and being comfortable with like the limits of the rational feels to me like solve a lot of our problems, or it could like provide a lot of necessary humanization of one another that I think is lacking severely. So I think that that's something that I hope happens with this work. I hope that everyone who approaches it is able to, like, regardless of who they are, is able to access within themselves ways that they might want to open up and examine and move into greater places of trust and trust in some of that mystery, whether that's the mystery of learning who your child is as they grow into an adult, or the mystery of one's own self, or the mystery of a lover, because these things are all close, but in some way a little bit beyond what we can fully know.
Yeah.
I hope that it I don't know, I'm kind of a like spooky guy. Like I hope that it engages the shadow a little bit for people, because I something that feels really important is the ambiguity of the body as like both a site of violence and also that we all have that capacity as well to inflict harm and violence on one another. So I hope that it's able to hold that, and maybe I think like I feel like forgiveness is a really huge part of that for me too, and being able to forgive ourselves if we've ever harmed another person, which like I know I have, probably like most people have in some way, you know, and just being able to be a little bit more forthcoming about it all and like not so filled with shame. It's like we're human, it's messy, it's like let's just like let it be what it is and not try to control what happens so much.
Yeah. Now I know that whenever you
Extra harder. So I guess we can talk about the fountain because it's more visible, and then maybe if we can rotate that for people to see it more easily, it can be seen.
Thank you.
No problem.
Sorry to like box you guys out. I don't know. It's a small space.
There we go. Goodbye.
Sorry. I guess so with the fountain, I feel like it's conceptually related with the Mother Wound series, but it's not exactly in the same series. But I was just thinking, again, like using lactation as this symbol for the ways that Black women are constantly, I feel like, compelled and asked in all kinds of ways that are like verbal and nonverbal to like overextend and exert ourselves with nothing a lot of the time in return, like nothing, like not even no money, like no nothing, like nothing, you know, and wanting to just thinking about like having this kind of like grotesque or like somewhat like eerie, creepy like collection of breasts that just are like endlessly pouring out milk, and like there's something in that is like it's like oh that's like it's like oh no that's horrible. Like when I think about what that would look like if it were flesh, which is like something that would be interesting to try to make with like silicone or something, but if thinking about what that would look like, or like I don't know, I hate being in a position where I feel like if I reject this call to be this like vessel that's just like constantly nurturing and giving that out, that there's so much, I feel like there's some kind of social or personal backlash, but then also like I am, and it's like that place of ambiguity because I think by nature, not only by or by nature, I don't even know. Who knows? It's so complicated. I have no idea. But I am a nurturing person. Like, I like to give because I know how good it feels. It feels good to give in as much as it feels good to receive. And I think for me, it's like I wouldn't have such a problem with sharing myself if I feel like I got a measure of what was being offered in return, you know? And so I think that piece is sort of me trying to reckon and understand some of those feelings. And just thinking about the ways that, like, I don't know, the ways that a body can, again, like, it can't, like, think something about being compelled and, like, wanting, like, even the desire to provide care can feel so loaded in this way that if I can feel it in my body and it feels like really intense in this like cellular kind of way, but I don't know if I'm able to, it's not something that I can communicate only with words, or even only in an image. Like, it feels like there's always something about that way that it feels fraught, that feels like a little intangible or inescapable. And then with this piece, this is just me trying to like understand again some of these questions around simultaneity, like this interchange between a snake as well as just like this feeling of like just, I don't know, feeling overcome with like this, like the flood of emotions and the flood of physical sensations, and how sometimes it's like I actually want to just move away from it because it feels like so much. And also just the ways that like that like white figure crawling in through the mouth that sort of like moves through between the two figures through that portal, and then as it's in the portal it gets transformed into something that's also kind of like primordial and kind of like protean. It's like a little bit like it like devolves as it moves through these like two parts of the self. But then, and like I use this egg in a couple of pieces here, and I use it in other pieces elsewhere too, but that being a symbol of not necessarily like new life, but just the just potential in any form. I think in this piece it's like potential that it's like this larger one, yeah. The two figures that it's sort of like their bodies, like they're sharing body parts, and it's sort of like confusing like who is doing what and if it's violent or not. And the egg in that piece represents the potential for all of these different things that could possibly be transpiring between these two figures.
Yeah. Other questions?
What are some other symbols that reoccur in your work?
I use the symbol of breast milk a lot too. I like to make, and it's a little bit here too, but I like to make rivers of it, or just lots of things like kind of like pouring forth from the body too. Like there's other pieces, and it's a little bit in that kind of like Madonna piece. There's like these smaller heads or faces that for me are like, our ancestors of unknown name or origin, or like people that I can sense but can't name, or sense but can't place, and how they are also being sort of transmitted through the body. They wind up like flowing out of orifices a lot in other works. There's also in that piece pattern, which I use a lot, like this like black and white pattern that is symbolically has like personal symbolism because it reminds me of a particular family member, but it's also a common mud cloth pattern that I think a lot of Black American people try to call in that sense of place and history through adornment. And so, and also thinking about the way that pattern shows up, or like the concept of patterns, or like different patterns show up in families or in history, and things like move in these ways that are repetitive.
Yeah.
So that's and other works, like the figures will be Black figures, and then they'll be covered in this white mud cloth, or like this white kind of like on the skin as this like fabric or pattern.
Yeah.
Maybe one more question and then we'll wrap up. Francis?
Your healing practice, do you like heal other people, or is it just a healing practice that you have for yourself? Makes sense.
I don't know if I would say that I like heal other people. I try to like hold space for other people in their healing of themselves. But yeah, it's something that I feel like it starts for me, and then I can like extend and radiate into other people's lives. And it's something that at different points I've held space for, more formally, and practices that I've held space for, like, and then in this way of like, I'm providing this service to this person, and it also can take an informal way of just like getting a hunch and being like, have you ever thought about taking horehound tea? I feel like you might like horehound tea, and then there's this mystery that unfolds around that for someone or something like that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I've been, for the past like 3 years, I studied as a clinical herbalist also, so I have that, working knowledge that informs the way that I conceptualize my own body too.
Thank you, Jade.
Yeah, thank you.